silence, to remember all of those who we have lost as a result of the war of freedom of speech and the rights for fight for human rights in the Philippines and around the world. Thank you again, all, for being here today, this evening, or morning, wherever you're tuning in from. Our apologies for the technical difficulty there, but we are back and we're just happy that you're joining us today. I'm so grateful for my co host here, Brian, who is joining us from the Philippines. My name is Ginger Leopoldo from Circa Pintig, and I'm here from Chicago.
Hi, magandang umaga po uli sa inyo mula rito sa Pilipinas. Ginger, good evening dyan sa Chicago. I am Brian Arda from Concerned Artists of the Philippines and Surianong Sini o SUSI. Let me just introduce ang ating mga organizers para sa activity sa event natin ito. No? Si Ginger is from Circa Pintig, which is a Chicago-based Filipino-American organization na committed din sa pagpapakilala at pagpapaulat ng mga usapin tungkol sa ating lipunan. They are particularly into the movements for social justice and transformative change sa pamamagitan ng teatro. Ang Concerned Artists of the Philippines naman ay isang pulungan din ng mga artista ng bayan na katulad din ng Circa Pintig ay para rin sa pagbabago sa ating lipunan. Especially now, Ginger, na sa panahon ng pandemya, meron pa rin mga nagaganap na pag-atake at pang-aabuso sa ating karapatan.
Yes, this is right, Brian. And I'm so happy that we can come together to lift up the voices of the artists. This is a safe space for us to hear the words, the music, the poetry, the songs, and the dance. But as we continue, and as you know, we are streaming live this recording on Facebook. But as we continue, I want to thank Circa Pintig's devoted and generous supporters who have joined us today Without your financial support, we can't continue with programs like this. All summer, Brian, we have been hosting these global virtual events. So, in
Wow.
some ways, this pandemic has made us to find other ways to connect with our community. And how wonderful it is now that even though I'm here in Chicago and you're there in the Philippines, that we can
That's
do
right.
this program together. So we do have wonderful supporters who have supported us during our LGBTQ fundraising events. We've got a current fundraiser now for a People's Artist Fund. So
Wow.
Brian, meron kaming a dollar for dollar match. So for this September, if you make a contribution, a financial contribution to Circa Pintig, your contribution will be matched dollar for dollar.
Magkano na ba ang dollar to peso ngayon?
Hindi
50
ko
pesos?
50
O
ba?
sige, mag-donate ako.
Something like this. Pero if you are able, please consider making this donation. You can visit us on circapintig.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. Alam mo, Brian, we're already celebrating our 29th anniversary of
Wow.
Circa Pintig.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, so all of those contributions will be tax deductible. Pero do also know, Brian, as maybe some of the work that you do, we have been mostly a volunteer based organization. And so the work we do is near and dear to our hearts. So Pintig means pulse.
Heartbeat,
Diba?
yeah. Pulse.
Yes. So even though we're thousands of miles away, with technology, we're able to gather together for a common and important cause.
That's right. Kami rin po, ang activity na to, ang event na to ay mapapanood din po ninyo sa page ng Concerned Artists of the Philippines on Facebook at Artista ng Bayan. Like we said, we call this activity Ginger Talinhaga Laban sa Tirano, or in English, Metaphors Against the Tyrant. They say kasi, Ginger, that we artists, no, we are second liners to journalists, that we too are given the task of truth telling, that we too are also documenters of ongoing history. As artists, we advance our art, our craft, as a means to tell a story, criticize and expose, commit to memory, touch and move people in the hopes of effecting change para sa pagbabago, yung tunay at makatarungang pagbabago. We trust, Ginger, that our talinghaga at itong activity, itong ating live online event na ito ngayong gabi at umaga dito sa Pilipinas, at kahit sa ano pang paraan, in whatever form, our talinghaga, our metaphors will definitely do its share in history writing.
Thank you, Brian. This talinhaga, this is a new word for me. But I understand.
Malalim ba?
Oh, malalim. It's like, what? On the other hand, we believe that this talinhaga alone can't fight tyranny, right?
Yes.
Can't just be about these metaphors. It just isn't able to do that. No matter how critical, no matter how sharp, it can't. And this is why we gather and think together and strive to do much more than just create. And this has been the mission of the work that I have been doing here with Circa Pintig. It is about not what they see and experience on the stage, but it is what happens after. So as collectives, we raise voices and we reach out to more audiences to help them see what needs to be seen, hear what needs to be heard, as we too listen to the stories of the peasants and workers who lead in the creation of the change that we want, the change that will benefit each and every Filipino. As we too take part in this creation of this change, as we too form a part of this history making, Brian.
Yes. Alam mo, Ginger, nakakatuwa na kahit na nasa magkabilang panig tayo ng mundo, no? Katulad nga ng sinasabi dun sa isang kanta, tayo ay papalapit pa rin sa pamamagitan ng mga ganitong klase ng mga pagtitipon, ng mga ugnayan. Ilang balita lang, no, Ginger, tungkol dito sa ating lupang hinirang sa ating bansa. Simula pa nung naupo ito sa ang ating kasalukuyang Pangulo, no? si Ginoong Duterte. Since 2016, Ginger, tens of thousands of Filipinos have been killed in the president's failed war against drugs. Mga bata, matatanda, kung ano-anong edad, children as young as 4 years old have not been spared in this war against drugs. Alam mo, meron pang isang police general na ngayon ay senador na sinasabi niya, shit happens lang daw. Nakakasakit ng loob. Lalo na sa panahon ngayon, the Philippines has the longest running lockdown in terms of itong usapin tungkol sa pag-apula ng pandemya na itong coronavirus. And yet, nakikita natin na this tokhang style and riding in tandem killings, they continue to take place even as neighborhoods shut down early in the night because of imposed curfews. Kahit na mga curfew at kahit na ang daming mga uniformadong pulis at militar na nakikita natin sa mga kalye, nagaganap itong mga pagpatay na to. In the countryside, Ginger, peasants are being massacred. Patuloy pa rin ang pagpatay sa kanila. Kahit na nasa loob sila ng kanilang tahanan. Dahil nga daw lockdown, bawal lumabas ng bahay. In Samar, Negros, and Bicol in Central Philippines, Malacanang Order Memorandum number 32 is the military's license to kill. Police and military personnel harass individuals, families, and the entire community. This Memorandum 32, Ginger, no, patuloy itong nag-enable para magpatuloy itong mga gantong pag-abuso at ginajustify niya ang mga pagpatay dito sa countryside.
Wow, Brian, that's so tragic and heartbreaking. I understand that since the beginning of the lockdown in March, thousands have been arrested and jailed for acts that don't even qualify as violations of any law.
Yes.
Oo ba to? Failing to wear a mask, asking for aid, selling in the streets, getting to work, just simply trying to survive. Trolls have been quick to purvey the pasaway storyline, as if Filipinos need to be reprimanded because they never listen.
Yes, alam mo, masakit isipin, no? Pero gusto mo ring mabuhay kahit na mayroong ganitong nasa gitna ka ng pandemya, Ginger. And itong paraan ng mga mamamayan para magpatuloy ang kanilang buhay ay tinatawag ng gobyerno natin na mga pasaway at pabigat. Wala na daw pera kasi ang pamahalaan. Yan ang sinasabi parati ng presidente, no, kapag naka-tune in kayo doon sa mga midnight speeches niya na recorded naman. Kahit na alam natin na nire-report paratin na the government is incurring trillions and trillions of debt every time para lang sa pandemic servicing na sinasabi nila. Wala na raw tayong pera, Ginger, while we hear, di ba, about corruption in this agency here in the Philippines, yung PhilHealth, that is mandated to provide health insurance to Filipinos. Kontrobersa, napakaraming kontrobersa, Ginger, ang bumabalot sa administrasyon na ito. And yet, ang bawat pagpuna, every criticism, they say, is a threat to freedom of expression. Despite the opposition, I know you may have heard of this, the anti-terrorism bill was railroaded by the Philippine Congress. Although it was really contested, 30 petitions have been filed to protest against this bill. No, the anti-terror law, Ginger, sadly still took effect last July.
Yes, I know I know about this, Brian. We actually had one of our Raising Voices global events during that time. And it's a very heartbreaking thing to know that these are still happening today, that it's happening now. Well, this brings us to our program, diba, Brian? This is why we are here. We're here to watch and listen as the artists of the people respond. It's my wish that their words and songs and dance speak loud and clear.
Maalab na pagbati mula sa Surianang Sining. As we mark the 48th anniversary of the declaration of martial law by the dictator Marcos, let us learn the lessons and realize how they manifest in what is happening under the Duterte administration these days. When I was released from prison in 1976, less than a year, it was my sister's turn to disappear. I wrote this poem in memory of my sister and her collective, the Southern Tagalog 10, I call them. Jessica Sales, Cristina Catalia, Ramon Hasul, Modesto Sison, Gerardo Faustino, Virgilio Silva, Salvador Panganiban, Erwin de la Torre, Manuel Salvacruz, and my sister. Salvador Panganiban and Virgilio Silva were found in a ravine in Tagaytay, their body mutilated. Modesto Sison was buried and found in a common grave in Lucena, Quezon Province. And this is the poem, Pulang Kandila. Di ko na binibilang ang mga taon. Basta tuwing kaarawan mo, nagsisindi ako ng pulang kandila. Mga magulang nati yumaong nag-aabang sa iyong pag-uwi. Mga anak ko'y sa pangalan ka lamang na paglilimi. Sinong nakakaalam kung ika'y nasaan? Maliban sa kanila na dumakip, nagpahirap, gumahasa. At pagkatapos ng lupaypay na ang iyong katawan, sa iyong sentido ay nag-umang ng baril o nagtarak sa dibdib mong sugatan ng punyal. Sinong nakakaalam? Wala. Di ko na binibilang ang mga taon basta tuwing karawan mo, nagsisindi ako ng pulang kandila. Nakikipagtitigan ako sa dila ng apoy. Pilit sinisipat ang iyong banayad ng ngiti. Bumubulaga sa diliwariw ko, mga katawang dinamitan ng sugat at dugo, mga butong hinaltak sa laman, mga pagkataong dinuhagi ng mga halimaw. Di ko na binibilang ang mga taon. Basta tuwing karawan mo, nagsisindi ako ng pulang kandila. At sa kandilang yan, lalaging busilak ang apoy ng iyong alaala. Mag-aalab lagi ang init ng iyong pagsinta sa bayan, sa uri ng mga inapi, ng mga dinusta. Sa kandila ring yan, kakatas ang iwing hustisya.
For every child killed, for every mother mourning, for every kid de los santos, for every life taken too soon, we raise our fists for you, we march the streets for you. For each one of us, they take 1,000 more, will rise anew.
My heart is a burning city, wrapped by battle lines and body counts, by aerial bombs and the forced migration of migrant mothers who've only returned home to bury the children they left to feed. Gian Lloyd de los Santos was 17 years old when the Philippine National Police put a gun in his hand and told him to run. Carl Angelo Arnaiz was 19 years old when they shot him handcuffed and kneeling. Ronaldo de Guzman was only 14 when they stabbed him 30 times for just being a witness. My heart is a raging fire for the names that keep coming, for the names I can't remember, for the names I won't forget.
For every child killed, for every mother mourning, for every kid de los santos, for every life taken too soon, we raise raise our fists for you. We march these streets for you. For each one of us, they take 1,000 more will rise anew.
And I am sitting in front of relatives, sweating away their humanity, wiping away the blood, saying, that's what you get when you don't listen to the cops, or, well, all this power to the people might get me killed, and I get that. But how worthless must his last breath be to you? Balancing is not just an act anymore when you're hiding behind an imported culture, because this is not what our history has taught us. No, not ours, because our culture has been rich with resistance for the past 500 years, from Lapu-Lapu to Gabriela Silang to the current people's movement. The Filipino masses have always fought back. Even the land is angry. Mount Mayon erupts for the mountains that have collapsed. The Asia-Pacific rim shakes for the dried rivers and poisoned waters. My heart is our revolution, bringing fire and brimstone, clenched fists and bolos against the corrupt politicians and their foreign puppet masters whose greed fuels this bloodshed.
For every mother mourning, for every Quien de los Santos, for every life taken too soon. We take up arms for you. Within the old, we'll build the new. We'll oust the U.S. and their empire and Duterte too.
The movement that has brought dictators down, that will bring a dictator down, that is made of not only words but action. Have you forgotten your pain and the way it hungers for justice? Have you forgotten your anger and the pulse it leaves beneath your chest? Have you forgotten their names? Kian Lloyd de los Santos, 17 years old. Carl Angelo Arnaiz, 19 years old. Ronaldo de Guzman, 14 years old. There are too many names I can't remember. There are too many names I won't forget. There are too many migrant mothers coming back home to body bags. And I am sitting in front of relatives, sweating away their humanity, wiping away the blood. Have you forgotten your heart?
Red greetings. I am Rosel Pineda from the Concerned Artists of the Philippines and Congress of Teachers Educators for Nationalism and Democracy. In the time that we are commemorating the people's struggles against the martial law, as well as invoking that we should never forget the atrocities that the dictatorships have brought our country, we are gathering today to forge our solidarity once more in our diverse background and diverse capacities across continents and across global contexts, so that we may invoke once more the power of the people to resist atrocities, especially the atrocities that we are experiencing from the fascist Duterte government. The song that I'm going to sing for you today is entitled Uyayi and composed by a good friend of mine, Edge Oyanguren from Concerned Artists of the Philippines and the band Tubao. I also sang this song for their album, and it is dedicated to Diona Rosal, who is the demised daughter of Andrea Rosal, who just recently also passed in an encounter in Palawan. In brief, the song narrates of the heartache of a mother who's going to deliver her child in a jail because Andrea Rosal was at that time a political prisoner. This song is really about those hard conditions, and so we need to keep on struggling in order for conditions to be better. Mabuhay mga kasama. di ko alam kung may puwang ang mundong ito sa tulad mong anghel, sa puso mong dalisay, busilak na kalooban. At di ko rin alam kung paano'y paniliwanag mga rehas at tanikala na sa atin ay maghihiwalay. Ang tangi kong alam, kay tagal kang inintay, nananabik na masilayan, mayakap, mahagkan sa araw at gabi, ihehele sa aking tabi, nang magdama ang pagmamahal sa'yo at sa sambayanan. Ngunit kay bilis ng iyong paglisan, tulad ng biglang buhos ng ulan, baunin mo ang uyayin na ngayon ko lang maawit. Nananagoy para sa'yo at sa paglaya, nananagoy para sa'yo at sa paglaya.
Isang bukas na liham para sa mga alagad ng sining, sinulat ni Emmanuel Lacaba. Wala kaming tribo, at lahat ng tribo ay amin. Wala kaming tahanan, at lahat ng tahanan ay amin. Wala kaming pangalan, at lahat ng pangalan ay amin. Sa mga pasista, kami ang kaaway na walang mukha. Tila sa laring dumarating sa gabi, mga anghel ng kamatayan. Ang laging kumikilos, nagniningning, lihim na mata ng unos. Ang landas na hindi gaanong nilalakbay ang aming tinahak. At dahil dyan, ay nagbago ang lahat-lahat. Sa malaot madali, lahat tayo'y kailangang maging nakayapak na hukbo ng kagubatan. Mulat. Ang masa ay manunubos. Dito, sa piling ng manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating nawawalang henerasyon ay nakatagpo ng totoo, ng natatanging tahanan. Salin sa Filipino ni Jose Pete Lacaba.
Huwag mong papasokin kasi walang hiya ang bunganga ng madre niya.
Napakaganda. Dapat ang mayor muna ang mauna. I'd be happy to slaughter him.
Martial law of Mr. Marcos is very good. Mahirap kayo? Putang ina, sige. Magtiis kayo sa hirap at gutom. Wala akong pakialam.
I repeat it. Fuck you.
palipores ng lideratong lukring. At kapag nangahas umangal, ikaw ay tatambangan ng milyones na sikupanteng panayalagad ng kamangmangan.
Sabi ng pulis, mga sanggano lang ang nagpapatato. Kriminal na ring tumambay, kaya't mag-ingat-ingat na yun. Kapag ikaw ay nalista at nilabel na tulak o adik, baksak mo'y sa ibang listahan bilang EJK statistic.
Lahat ng Kristiyano, panis na raw ang poon. Huwag na raw manalig sa Diyos na walang sentido komon. Misyonaryong madre, say goodbye to your visas. Mga paring kapag sa api, prepare to meet Jesus!
Pinitar sa kanayunan, nagiging sikyo ng mga corporate box. Hinaras ang pamansang minorya, sideline daw ang extra box. Hinaagawan ang lupa, pinapatay, tinatawag ng mga terorista. Wala daw dapat sinasangto ang karir, professional, pasista. Tayo ang lakas, tayo ang nagupit sa likod nitong sigwa ng pag-aka. Tayo ang mga boses sa likod ng sigaw. Itong mga besong mapagpalaya na siyang magsisilbing ilaw. Sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng lagim, sa gitna ng lagim. Sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng lagim, sa gitna ng lagim.
Kamay na bakal, pambutusal sa umaangal, pamamaslang sa mga lansangan, umaalingasaw ang kalawan, dulot sa dugong, langis na makinarya, kasaysayan nagpapakilala, kapag karapatay binabasura, sumatsyatsa na ang diktatorya.
Rasista, misogynista, bugaw ng birheng alay sa turista, respetado raw kababaihan, pero baliktad ang pinapakita, galit raw sa rape, tas nung time yung na-rape, sana daw nauna siya sa pila. Kung palaban at mulak ng biglang natapat ko silon na bisong matatatakata.
Magsasaka sa mga hasyenda, inalipin pa rin manggagawang binigyan ng pag-asa, naka-endo pa rin mangisda sa karagatan, pinupuli pa rin sa teritoryong isinuko kapalit ng katsing, 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 katsing. So, salamat sa machong leader sa tatapang na siyang sa baliw. Kapag mayaman at malakas ang kalaban, dapat daw maging magiliw kaysa mapaaway sa pagtatanggol. Soberanya at patrimonya, tapos ng Kastila, Amerikano, Japon, probinsya ng China. Tayo ang bangis, tayo ang lakas, tayo ang nagupit sa likod nitong sigwa ng pag-aka. Tayo ang mga boses sa likod ng sigaw. Itong mga besong mapagpalaya na siyang magsisilbing ilaw. Sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng lagim, sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng dilim, sa gitna ng lagim, sa gitna ng lagim. Lumaban, huwag magkampante! Pigilan ang pagkatake! Lumaban, huwag magkampante! Pigilan ang pagkatake!
Napaka-tapang, Ginger, nung mga nakita natin na performances. Yan ang nais natin sabihin doon sa Talinhaga.
That's right, Brian, how powerful those performances were.
Well, for the first set of performances, no, nakita natin yung performance ni Tata Nanding Joseph, di ba? Si Tata Nanding ay ang artistic director ng Tanghalang Pilipino mula sa Cultural Center of the Philippines. Ito yung kanilang resident theater company. Yung kanyang tula na binasa, yung isang bukas na liham sa mga alagad ng sining or an open letter to Filipino artists. It was written by Filipino poet and freedom fighter Eman Lacaba in 1976 in Davao del Norte. Rosel Pineda naman, yung kumanta ng Uyayi, is the artistic director of Aurora Artistic Residency Program. Yung kantang Uyayi ay sinulat ng isang kasama rin namin mula sa Concerned Artists of the Philippines, si Edge Uyanguren. Siya rin ay miyembro ng music group na Tubaw. Ito ay tungkol sa namatay na anak ni former political prisoner Andrea Rosal. Ginger, sinabi ko kanina na patuloy yung mga atrocities ng government, no, dito sa Pilipinas kahit na panahon pa rin ng pandemya. Alam mo ba na just 2 weeks ago, Andrea Rosal along with 4 other comrades, they were killed in Palawan.
Wow. Wow. May they rest in peace and in power, Brian. Hashtag stop the killings.
Yes.
Well, I do recognize Anthony Bakay, Love Jordan, and Maya Arcilla from Malaya, Chicago, Midwest. And their pieces were inspiring. Just as Bonnie Ligan, who is currently the chair of Surya Nang Sining, piece was also just as strong and powerful. So Brian, those who are fighting against the violence, those who are advocates for peace, I understand that they are targets of harassment, red tagging, incarceration, and forced disappearance and murder. Is that right?
Yes, Ginger, masaklap na katotohanan yan dito sa Pilipinas, no. Last year, Filipino-American activist Brandon Lee was shot in front of his house in Ifugao. Brandon might have survived the attempted murder, no, the attempt to his life, but definitely he was left with permanent injuries. And nakakatuwa pa rin naman na kahit na dinanas ni Brandon yung ganun na klase ng karanasan sa kanya, no, sa kamay ng pasistang rehimen na ito, no. Brandon is still continuing to be part of the fight of the Cordillera people. Ginger, during this time of lockdown, cultural worker Marlon Maldos, community workers Lori Porquia and Carlito Badio, peasant and peace advocates Randall Carandi Achanis and Sara Alvarez were brutally killed. Sila yung huling nadagdag doon sa mahabang listahan ng mga pagpatay ng rehimen na ito. Ginger, activists here in the Philippines and even in other places in the world, no, they still continue to receive death threats. Even elected lawmakers here in the Philippines, yung mga kasama natin sa Makabayan Bloc, they are being tagged as communists by the presidential communication official, no less. Alam mo yung ang sakit isipin na sa kanila mismo nang gagaling yung panre-red tag na ito. While trillions are rendered jobless still during this time of the lockdown because of the pandemic, Ginger, POGO operations ensure that Chinese workers have jobs. Mabuti pa sila, pero kamakailan lang merong 11,000 na empleyado mula sa isang malaking network dito sa Pilipinas ang nawala ng trabaho dahil lamang inalisan ng prangkisa ang kanilang korporasyon. Sabihin na natin ang ABS-CBN. Still, these Chinese, no, through government contracts, they still have jobs because they can still push through because the government allows them to do so. Our fishermen, ang ating mismong mga mangingisda at magsasaka, hirap na hirap, they are endangered in their own spaces, especially the fishermen. They are endangered in their own territorial waters.
Yes, Brian. And alam mo, the sellout of the sovereignty is not exclusive to China, because the government still has its longtime superior with military agreements still in place. Now, this is in recent news, Brian. Just last week, or less than 5 days ago, September 13, 2020, convicted murderer U.S. soldier Scott Pemberton boarded a plane to America and walks free from his crime against Jennifer Laude. Dark times are times for media to work double time. But double time did the Duterte administration work to vindictively act against its critics. First, media executive Maria Ressa was convicted of cyber libel. Then ABS-CBN's franchise got canceled. Now, this is during a pandemic when information is most essential. The network's regional stations, which delivered news to far localities, made a final sign-off. And this is in face of these obvious forms of warnings. Journalists carry on with their oaths. The alternative press, of course, survives the repression of the regime after regime and remains to be what it needs to be, the eyes and voice of the people.
Yes, Ginger. Kaya sa bahagi na ito, no, ladies and gentlemen, mga kasama, mga kaibigan na nanonood po ng ating talinghaga ngayong gabi, at umaga dito sa Pilipinas, tunghayan po natin ito pong kasunod ng mga pagtatanghal mula sa mga magkikiting ng mga artista ng bayan.
Yo, Kasama's in the building. I was born in a place with 7,000 islands.
But isn't that depending on the ties, man? Indigenous tribes who survive in the countryside, living off the land far and wide, what they can provide.
Like coconuts and rice?
Yeah, like copper and gold. Way before the times resources were taken and sold.
So I'm guessing this is way before Philip and Magellan when they came colonized and changed the name of our island.
But Magellan didn't make it, he lost his head to that dude.
Who?
The Datu.
Which one?
Man, Lapu-Lapu.
No wonder they mad with all the troops that they sent.
Yeah, that's why we have names with the Spanish descent.
But they didn't expect the right to katipunan yung mga lumaban para sa kinabukasan kataas-taas ang kagalang-galangan katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan.
Fast forward.
When the Japanese invaded, the people fought back and the hooks were created.
Fast forward. When the U.S. returned, we got burned. In that process, that's a lesson we learned.
Fast forward. Martial law was declared.
Hold up. Let me take it from here. The year was 72, human rights been abused. Forced and couldn't choose, had to follow a curfew. But what did that do? Spark a short fuse. An underground movement of those with different views.
It started with the youth and the students who was down. We continue organizing nice people around.
Fast forward. Have you heard about the LEP, the OFW, like you and me?
I know the labor export policy. We're returning money back to our families.
And you're the money that we sent.
Some are taking from our taxes.
The government's debt.
God is sending all these boxes.
It's time to represent
and organize the masses.
Kasama's in the building, putting theory into practice.
All the people in the struggle in this world that look like jungle, working 9 to 5 so they can stay alive. Kasi kaming minorities lagi na lang nagtitiis, pero pag nainis mga busi mapapalis. They gotta hear our voice, they got no fucking choice. Kahit anong gawin hindi kami mananahimik. Binabato nila sa aming puro bulok na game, pero tinatamaan sila sa aming mga lyrics. Now it's our time to rise up and motherfucking wake up. With all the shit they feed us, they think they gonna kill us, pero wait, they got no chance of winning this debate. It's the people versus system. Fuck imperialism, cause we rising up and rising up, cause all of us is fed up. All the people in the government, I think they need to shut up. We ain't backing up, we fighting back, hindi kami takot. We a veteran, we all the fucking battles that we fought.
Yo, we're here, we're ready, we hold the block steady.
Along with the Kasama, dropping all the seconds heavy. Heavy in the midnight, all ready to burn. Applying concrete conditions to the lesson we learn.
I say we're here, we're ready, we hold the block steady.
Along with the Kasama, dropping all the seconds heavy. Heavy in the midnight, all ready to burn. Applying concrete conditions to the lesson we learn.
Nakataktada, hagada, sa laban ay kabilang. Sanay pa rin sa hirap, pagmula ng isinilang. Lupang hinirang, babawiin natin ng natin sa imperialism. Mapangapi na sa atin umalipin. Kahit nandito, sasabay pa rin sa dulo. Dehesto na magbabago, walay ko ay dugtong. Para sa masa may pagkasanggat tayo'y humihinga. Kapag ayaw ng pakinggan, itadaan sa pakikipaka. Magsama-sama, magsasaka at manggagawa. Lamunin nila ang pera, mas malakas ng ating pwersa. Bureaucrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo. Ito'y ibabagsak kahit Duterte mismo. Kaya ako ay handang-handang itaya ang buhay para sa bayan. Mga kasama na nawalay, bigyang justisya na makamit ang katarungan. Susunod ng susulong ipaglalaban ang kalayaan.
We're here, we're ready, we hold the block steady. Along with our kasama, dropping all the like confetti. Heavy in the midnight, all ready to burn. Applying concrete conditions to the lesson we learn.
I say we're here, we're ready, we hold the block steady.
Along with the kasama, dropping all the like confetti. Heavy in the midnight, all ready to burn. Applying concrete conditions to the lesson we learn. The fighting spirit goes on, but it's tainted by the limelight. In hindsight, to advocate is my divine right. And rhyme tight like the educated my mind. For the freedom that the people need to shine bright. Build the wall of the certain, that certain people working, serving the burden, those who deserve it. More than just the coconut hunts or us mad. We know that the devastation wasn't now the country's a bust. It's an us for us to rebuild. And perseverance is a Filipino key skill. Non-stop movement, no we can never be still. Analyze the problem with attention to the details. For the heroes in the past, who swam with the mass and looked past all the visions of glass. So with the clash of the titans, no help from a unicorn, man by a human soldier without a uniform.
Hey yo, we're here, we're ready, we hold the block steady. Along with Dr. Kasama, chopping all this like confetti.
Heavy in the midnight, all ready to burn. Applying concrete conditions to the lesson we learn.
I said we're here, we're ready, we hold the block steady. Along with Dr. Kasama, chopping all this like confetti.
Heavy in the midnight, all ready to burn. Applying concrete conditions to the lesson we learn.
Yeah.
Hey, yo, Kasama's in the building.
Yeah.
Circuit and Dig. Chi-Town represent.
Yeah. We out. Peace.
Doble bara.
Nandito lang ako, nasa puso ko ang pangalan mo, Ruswininda. Nandito lang ako,
Ikaw pa rin ang
nasa puso ko
sinisigaw.
ang pangalan mo, Ruswininda, Ruswininda.
Ako ay sinalubong ng mainit na hangin. Sinag ng araw na nakatitig sa akin. Matagal-tagal na rin aking ninais na tahakin. Nakatipon balang araw at
Makauwi sa amin
aking pag-uwi, hahanapin ang taho. Soft drinks na naka-plastic
at may straw.
Mamamasyal tayo, pupunta sa malayo. Lumabas ng probinsya.
Kahit nakaroro, helmet at Adidas, paborito ko yun.
Tubasa, umaga at tulog sa balon. Aking uulitin ang gawain ko noon. Magpakuman ng panahon.
Ganun pa rin ako ngayon.
Balik sa bayan, balik sa lupang sinilangan. Balik sa buhay na aking nakasanayan.
Balik sa
pagkakang aking naiwanan. Babalik at babalik na nagtuluyan ng balik sa bayan.
Nandito lang ako,
Ikaw pa rin ang
nasa puso ko
sinisigaw.
Sinisigaw
ang pangalan mo'y Lusinday, Lusinday. Nandito lang ako,
ikaw pa rin ang
nasa puso ko.
sinisigaw.
Ang pangalan mo, Lusinday, Lusinday.
Paglapag ng aeroplano na dama, hindi matapos, di alam ang gagawin. Parang nanalo ko sa loto, ingay sa paligid. Musika sa aking tenga, wala sa sarili. Hinay-hinay muna, teka, sa dami gustong gawin, di ako mapapali. Sa wakas, unang beses ko nakauwi, balik sa bayan kung saan isinilang kala pa naginip, pero walang tupang binibilang. Kay sarap palikan ng lupang sariling atin, di pwede kong talikuran dahil dito ko nang galing ang init sa tanghali, tapos presko paggabi. Mga bata sa kalsada, tapos inuman sa tabi. Barkada na di na yata magbabago, tuloy pa rin ang kulitan at panggagago. Dito ako, lumaki dito ako, masaya dito ako, ay ako kapag kasama ko sila.
Dito lang ako,
Ikaw pa rin ang
nasa puso ko.
sinisigaw.
Ang pangalan mo'y Lusinday, Lusinday. Nandito lang ako,
Ikaw pa rin ang
nasa puso ko.
sinisigaw.
Ang pangalan mo, Lusinday, Lusinday.
Luz Vinenda.
Dito lang ako, nasa puso ko. Ang pangalan mo, Lusinday, Lusinday. Nandito lang ako,
Ikaw pa rin ang
nasa puso ko.
sinisigaw.
Ang pangalan mo, Lusinday, Lusinday. Nandito lang ako, nasa puso ko. Ang pangalan mo, Lusinday, Lusinday.
Peace.
Pinoy Rock Radio.
When startled by ambush, wild boar will flee for the mountains, will not beg for mercy when finally cornered with spears. Wild boar will snarl, stir the soft soil with hooves, in charge. Tusks sharp as unsheathed machete slicing bare thigh. In the Philippines, mass movements organized for genuine democracy. For decades, dictators have repressed all resistance. Hundreds of thousands have disappeared or died. Like wild boar, my people do not beg for mercy when finally cornered with spears. Do not bow their heads like a wet snout for fascists in office. The ruling class cackles at our dead, hogties our comrades in the countryside, offers a bounty for their butchered bodies. I hear news of Josephine, breathless, on a hospital table in Batangas. The smell of gunfire singes her hair like dry mud crusted on fur. I build an altar of lavender and sing to her grave, remembering every fascist regime that has hunted my people has failed. Last century, the United States invented the Colt 45 pistol to carry out my people's death. A bullet can rip holes through my people, and still it cannot tear our movement apart. My people, do not turn on their sides and surrender. Do not squeal in distress. My people, bury whatever limbs are left of our martyrs. A tortured mother below a mango tree, her cousin next to a field of rice. My people, become a mouth of teeth, a herd of wild boar plunging pounds of jaw into tyrants. And when the state declares all-out war on my people, we respond in all-out resistance. We clench our bolo blades in hand and will not unfurl our fists until the empire is beheaded.
Stand with me, all my sisters, for no battles are fought alone. Here we pledge our lives, we offer heart and soul, and flesh and bone. In the factories and our kitchens, we labor like the midnight sun, toil the fields and tend the children. Women's work is never done. Fight for justice in the workplace, guard the ranks they seek to bleed. Let our bodies sing resistance as we rage against imperial greed. Let our bodies sing resistance when their armies come. All defend her home and country. We shall not succumb. Once we march for the ballot, for bread and roses once we fought. No uprising is ever forgotten. The struggle lives and we march again. Fight for justice in the workplace, guard the ranks they seek to bleed. Let our bodies sing resistance as we rage imperial greed. Fight for justice in the workplace, guard the ranks they seek to bleed. Let our bodies sing resistance as we rage against imperial greed. Let our bodies sing resistance as we
manggagawa, kayong lumilikha ng yaman ng bansa, kayong malaon ng ginupo ng dahas. Magkaisa't labanan ng pangapi, kahit na libong buhay man ang masawi. Walang kailangan kung ang magiging kapalit ay ang kalayaang minimithi. Manggagawa, kayong lumilikha ng yaman ng bansa, kayong malaon ng ginupo ng dahas. Magkaisa't labanan ng pangapi, kahit na libong buhay man ang masawi. Walang kailangan kung ang magiging kapalit ay ang kalayaang matagal nang minimithi. Panahon na mga kasama, ipakita ang lakas ng ating pagkakaisa. Panahon na mga kasama, na makamta ng bayan ang tunay na kalayaan. Panahon na mga kasama, ipakita ang lakas ng ating pagkakaisa. Panahon na mga kasama, na makamta ng bayan ang tunay na kalayaan. Kalayaan.
Wow, Brian, what powerful performances there are. As one of our supporters and Kapintig members just mentioned, what a really great lineup we have. We just saw Rodi Vera. He's a playwright and theater director and screenwriter. He has done a lot of work here with us here in Chicago. There was also Monique Wilson, a theater and film actress and director of 1 Billion Rising, and Pasada, a Manila-based hip-hop group. The Kasamas, based here in the U.S., in the West Coast. I mean, we're just really global, diba? And of course, Troy Osaki, a Filipino, Japanese poet and community organizer in Seattle. As we speak, the world continues to move in ways that we haven't seen in recent years. No virus can stop people from pouring out in the streets to demand justice, equality, state accountability, to call for resignation, if not ouster, of the government officials. In many ways, people of the world share a common experience of the state of tyranny and fascism. In many ways, we see how one country's struggle is related to another's. And in many ways, we make sure to show support and solidarity in each other's fight, because in many ways we share a common history of struggle.
Ngayong gabi, mga kasama, ginamit natin ang iba't ibang forma ng sining bilang talinghaga upang ipahayag ang napakaraming kwento ng ating mga bayani at ng ating mga kasama. Alam natin na hindi lamang ito simpleng mga talinghaga o kung ano-ano mang forma lamang ng sining. Ang bawat nakita ninyong pagtatanghal at mga masasaysayang pang pagtatanghal ay kwento ng katotohanan, mga kwento na nakaukit sa ating kasaysayan na patuloy nating ipinahahayag bilang mga artista ng bayan. Ito ay nakaukit sa mapait na kasaysayan at mahabang struggle, mahabang paglaban ng ating mga kasama para sa isang tunay na pagbabago at makatarungang lipunan. We continue to recite and continuously write that which is true and historical. Ginger, history in the Philippines did not end when martial law ended in 1986. In fact, patuloy pa rin itong nasusulat at nakikita natin na paulit-ulit na bumabalik pa rin ang mga pagpapahirap na ito sa ating mamamayan sa pamamagitan ng kasalukuyang administrasyon. It continues to be written. We must never follow that part of history and allow the attempts to revise it. We must never allow the return of the Marcoses to power. We must never allow any form of extension by the Duterte regime. At kahit na alam natin mga kasama na ito ay hindi madali at nasasadlak tayo madalas sa panganib, we trust that our solidarity, our built solidarity, will help us look after each other, fight for and with each other, kahit nasaan man tayong bahagi ng mundo. At itong aktibidad natin ngayong umaga dito sa Pilipinas at gabi dyan sa US ay isang pagpapakita ng pagtutulungan at pagkakaisa na ito. Sa bahaging ito, ulit Ginger, no, tuloy-tuloy na ang ating programa. Tunghayan po natin muli ang isa pang grupo ng mga pagtatanghal mula po sa ating mga kasama dito sa Pilipinas at sa US na mga artista ng bayan.
Humarap tayo noon sa mga tangke, sa mga bala at baril sa sariling pangamba. Kaya naman inaalala natin taon-taon ang mga naganap sa kalye ng EDSA na parang drama sa telebisyon. Tandang-tanda ko pa ang lahat, Ate Charo. Sama-sama, kapit-bisig, pinapalakas ang loob ng kapal at dami ng tao ng paghimok ng pangako. Pagbabago, magkakaroon ng pagbabago. Kay raming larawan ng pagharap sa tangke, tangkeng panakot sa mamamayang lumalaban, tangkeng mapamuksa sa kakara-hara sa daraanan. Anong mga diskurso ng pagluhod sa harap ng tangke ang nagdulot ng pagkalito sa makapagbubunsod ng pagbabago? Anong pagbubunyi ang sanhi ng pag-uunahan, pagsisikuhan sa pagtatala ng pagkabayani? Ilang beses na bang pinagkakitaan ng mga huwad at taksil sa layon ang buhay na ibinuwis ng taong bayan? Ang dugo na itinigis ng mga tunay na revolusyonaryo. Pagbabago. Nasaan ang pagbabago sa bayang mahirap, sa ligodon ng kapangyarihan ng dating salat, sa kasalatan pa rin nakasadlak? Pebrero na naman, Ate Charo. Manong sumulat ka naman, te, sa mahal na Pangulo. Sa kanya'y itanong, kailan po tutuparin ang pangakong pagbabago? Kailan ibabasura ang EDCA? Kailan magwawakas ang kontraktualisasyon? Tuluyang mapasasara ang mga minahan o magpapatuloy ang usapang pangkapayapaan? Gusto nating sumulong, ngunit humaharap tayong lagi sa mga tangke. Tangke ng pasista, tangke ng pansariling interes, tangke ng oligarkiya. Mahal na kabataan, pagpugayan ang taong bayang nagalsa sa EDSA. Ngunit tandaan, hindi pa tapos ang laban. Magsatangke, kayang magsanggalang, kayang umasinta, magpakatibay at isulong, ituloy ang pakikibaka.
I'm strong. Even I admire that in myself. I fight fierce beasts in the wilderness. I won't be cowed, I say. confinement, we'd sing our song. I will forget this, I said. We will get through this, that's what I said. Have you ever seen a broken soul? I'm not alone, that's what I said. They tortured so many of us, I can't hear them anymore, but I know there are many. It's been so long, but it still haunts me. It haunts me. Whisper small. It haunts me. Strangers say. It haunts me. The loving touch for all my life. It haunts me. Have you ever seen a broken soul? Break your body, and at last they'll break your soul. They will break your mind, they will break your body, they will break your mind, and at last they'll break your body, and at last they'll break your soul.
Sa entero kapuputan, pasapton ng katawhan, sa kalihukan. Kapuputan, pasapton ng katawa sa kalihukan. Nasudnong demokrasya ang gikinahanglan sa katawan para sa kagawasan. Tigpanaligod sa katawan, pasisa nga paghari mao'y batukan. Batok sa estado, daghang kadaugan na tagantang sa mga nilubigan. Natukod ng kalihukan, gihiusa ang katawan, gipakusog ang pakikisog sa kabukiran. Sa hustong linya, nasudnong demokrasya ang politika. Dili kalimtan, mga kauban kita makatun sa pakikiso. ng kalihukan, hihimusa ang katawan, di pa kusog ang pakikisog sa kabukiran. Sa entero kapuputan, pasakto ng katawan, sa kalihugan. Nasudnong demokrasya ang giginakanglan sa katawan para sa kagawasan. Batok sa estado, daghang kadaugan na tagamtam sa mga nilubigan. Dili kalimtan, mga kauban, kita makatun sa pakikisog. Mga kauban, kita makatun sa pakikisog.
My mother cut her tongue on foreign language. She would perm, reband my hair normal, straight. She would comfort me. And for the girls at school, made fun of my flat face, even put up with people, daughter, mocking the way our ancestors came alive in her accent. My mother worked the third shift, sometimes 16 hours a day, sacrificing family to care for family, even got that holiday pay, chasing the empty promises of a nation whose people dare to say, go back to your country. As if she did not already wish she was home. The venom was always appled with a smile. This country has denied the history it has forged, hiding its serpent tongue behind caged teeth for over a century. They promised us independence. When we were on the brink of our own bright future, we were deceived and then betrayed as they thieved with one invented victory after another. Now we are forced to hold onto America like the frame of a house, like the bars of a jail cell, like the hushed mercy of an opium pipe, as if it were not them who killed every boy above the age of 10. The foreign nations that sullied our nature's roots applied their whips in the form of carrots and sticks without an understanding of the power of our fists, the rhythm of our blood, or the righteousness of our struggle. So now I return to my mother's country, our homeland, to remember, to dig up the corpses of martyrs, to stick my feet deep in the mud that digests our grief, to face our painful past and dare to build our bright futures, an ocean raging in my belly, my body rising like a fist. We are being called home to carry on a fight that has raged on for the past 500 years. But our time, the homeland and I, like a mother and her overseas child, is limited. Chained at a distance to imperialist masters, my shackles too still jingle. And it is because of this that I'm ever so emboldened to liberate our chains, to move our mountains, to lift our masses and follow their lead as we bring dawn to this long night. Back home, in my memory, is lush, is green, is bolo in hand and sun kissing my back. It is my grandmother in every poem and my grandmother on every front. But like these nanais, even my poetry isn't free. Even I can be taken away, exiled by debts piling on our dining room table, detained by papers and governments that say my body does not belong to this fight, rejected by swallowed lies and contradictions forced into our mouths by cowards. This makes me all the more willing to strike at our chains, for some history is an interest, a dinner party, conversation, For us, it is an ancestral battle embedded in skin, running through vein. For us, it is an ongoing struggle taken up, a legacy carried on. So I wield these words like guerrillas wield their guns. I wield a lineage of fighters who died too early. The reserve of their bullets run through my blood in this unabashed tongue, in these palms crusted with soil. So before the final notice, before the sun rises on our nation unchained, let this poem be a formal warning for this morning's new teeth after the long cries of last night, from the women who have faced the mayor soldiers, from the mothers who have lost their sons and daughters for the fight. Do not turn away. Do not dare be ashamed. Listen, let their constant wails find you, let them hold you, let their indignation swarm your senses, and let their cries teach you how to love your people harder, so that when they rise, so do you. Our people are not beaten down by bullets and aerial bombs, are not calling on empires to fall, sacrificing life to liberate nation for their overseas children. Our people still, no matter their birth nation, to look away. So listen, let us grasp the legacy that is ours, rip the blindfolds off to see truth, that despite whatever bargain we strike with the devil, our people are not free. This injustice, not destiny. Let us take hold of history's outstretched arms, raise up our own to fan the flames of revolution. The bright sun will rise. The red dawn will break. Let us say that liberation is not long forgotten. So raise your body like a fist. Feel the oceans raging in your belly. Turn your face towards the light. You are being called home. This is still your fight.
Bakit ko kayo titigilan? Kung patuloy niyong pinipiga, pinapahirapan ang mga magsasaka, at dinudusta ang masa, bakit ko kayo titigilan? Kung patuloy niyong kinukurakot ang pondo ng bayan, pinapatay, kinukulong at dinudukot ang mga aktivista na sa inyo'y lumalaban, bakit ko kayo titigilan? Kung patuloy kayong sunod-sunuran sa mga sakim na dayuhan na dumarambong sa yaman ng mahal kong bayan, hinding-hindi ko kayo titigilan. Hanggat may palalong tirano na nakaupo sa palasyo, na hanggat ang mga anak pawis ay walang kapangyarihan, hindi ko kayo titigilan. Hindi ko kayo titigilan. Ni Randall Echanis.
baal, nangangamoy kalawang, mga kamaong buong ang dudurog sa pag-angal. Sama-sama pumantay na kasaysayan, walang mali sa paglaban ng mali, kaya lumaban. Manila, hindi waray-way, ibagsak ang haligi ang tayong gaway. Mga verdugong sa akin, umapatay, tutulugin hanggang sa tagumpay. Bagsak sa tagumpay! Manila, hindi waray-way, ibagsak ang haligi ang tayong gaway. Mga verdugong sa akin, umapatay, tutulugin hanggang sa tagumpay. Bagsak sa tagumpay! The revolution will not be televised. There'll be no pictures of you with a big vision that shot and got down and locked and dead. We'll put you inside that TV for so random. The revolution will not go better with Coke. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, not be televised, and be no rerun, brothers and sisters. The revolution will be live.
Nakamit natin sa protesta, nakamit natin sa kalsada, kaya huwag bitawan ang kalsada sa protesta. Ang dakilang pag-ibakay ng simula. Ang dakilang pag-ibakay ng simula. Ang dakilang pag-ibakay ng simula. Ang dakilang pag-ibakay ng simula.
Brian, another set of powerful performances, inspiring as well. I have a list here of some of our viewers and their comments and feedback. So I want to give a shout out to our playwright here in Chicago, Miss Lani Montreal, another supporter, Maren Perrin was here also viewing. And did you know, Brian, that we have someone from the Netherlands tuning in?
International nga yung activity natin.
It is really a global event. This is true. A shout out also to Levi Aliposa. So we're really making quite an impact. And how wonderful that this is also a recorded event so that people who maybe missed us right now can come back and view all of the strong and powerful performances.
Yes. Balita ko meron din daw isang nagkomento kanina, no? Tungkol doon sa mga napapanood niya ng mga performances. Nabanggit niya na nag-e-evolve yung genre ng protest music and then protest art and protest performances doon sa mga napanood niya. Totoo po yan, maraming salamat. Ganyan po ang pakay din natin mga artista ng bayan na patuloy na paunlarin ang ating sining upang patuloy pa natin na mas ipahayag malahad ng mas mabisa ang mga totoong kwento na nagaganap po sa ating lipunan. At itoong mga forma ng sining na inyo pong napanood, no, at napapanood pa ay mga paalala po sa atin lahat tungkol po sa ating tungkulin at kampanya na dapat nating kaharapin. Sabi nga, Ginger ni ka Brandy at Chinese, hindi ko kayo titigilan. Anyway, the performers, Ginger, si Dr. Joy Barrios is a poet, essayist, and teacher. Si Carlon Hosol naman is a choreographer and senior artist teacher sa PETA or the Philippine Educational Theater Association. Circa Pintig na minention na natin kanina, same with the Concerned Artists of the Philippines. And si Love Jordan naman, mula dun sa unang bahagi, kasama niya si Anthony and Maya. And finally, Ian Lumongo is also a member of the Concerned Artists of the Philippines. He is an actor and visual artist. Yung tula na binasa ni Ian kanina, sinulat yun ni Randy Echanis in 2008 while he was in jail for trumped-up charges. Usong-uso yung mga ganyan dito, Ginger. Sinasampahan ng mga inventong kaso ang mga aktivista. Now, yung tula na hindi namin kayo titigilan is a continuing rallying cry of all peasants, peasant advocates, and peace advocates who demand justice for his death. At kaugnay nga niyan, alam natin, Ginger, na maraming mga events and activities tayo na nakalinya para sa mga susunod na araw dito sa Pilipinas at dyan din sa US. At syempre patungkol na rin sa komemorasyon ng martial law declaration noong September 21, 4 decades ago. Tunghayan po natin, tingnan po natin yung mga activities na yan.
Now, before we hear from our guests, we want to see this video message from Attorney Neri Colmenares, Chairperson of Bayan Muna.
Well, ang worst na nagawa sa akin probably was the Russian roulette. Yun ang hindi ko malimutan yun. Yun na ako sa isang kwarto, lasing eh. May English siya eh. Sabi niya, Neri, are you lucky tonight? Sabi niya, do you feel lucky? Sabi niya, siyempre tahimik lang ako, lasing eh. Kinuha niya malaking revolver niya. In-empty niya yun ng kitang-kita ko, in-empty niya eh. Nahuhulog eh. Oh, ito ha. Pasok lang ako ng isa ha. Pasok niya isa. Rotate niya. Tapos pinasok niya gano'n. Sabi niya, tingnan natin if you're lucky tonight. Alam mo, pag nasa loob yung barrel sa bunganga mo, ang lamig. Kasi nervyos ka na, tapos malamig na aircon. Sabi niya, sige, tingnan natin if you're lucky. Tsamba talaga yun kung mabuhay ka o hindi, di ba? So, anyway, drain na drain ako, sabi ko. Hindi, tahimik pala ako, wala akong sinasabi. Sabi niya, you're very lucky ah. Let's do it again. Merong isang asyenda sa Negros dati na walang tanim. The peasants were hungry. Alam niyo, may panahon sa Negros na tawag namin Tiempos Muertos, yung the season of death, na walang milling, walang pera, walang makain. Nagtanim ng kamote, na makakain nila. Yung pinakuha ng landlords. So, nagkaroon ng clash. Si Bishop Portich na mag-dialogue. Sabi ng mga farmers, mga sakada, mahirap mag-dialogue sa military at sa gobyernong martial law. Pero he convinced the farmers, 100 or so, na hindi, pumunta kayo sa gym, mag-dialogue tayo. I stood up for what I believe is right para sa taong bayan. Tapos tinest yung belief na yon And I thought, hindi ko kaya Na-torture ka, kinulong ka, all you have to do is say, yes, I give up, di ba? Yan naman ang demand ng martial law government sa'yo Learn how to be cowed to submission. If you don't learn how to be cowed to submission, we will crush you. Yun naman ang message So ang pinaka-lesson ko pala doon, you can stand up for the people and still survive.
Maraming salamat po kay Attorney Nery Colmenares mula sa Bayan Muna. Siya ang kasalukuyang chairperson ng Bayan Muna. Meron din tayong mga ilang panahon pa. We are joined in this activity by Tirano. She is part of the National Secretariat of Malaya Movement and she is based in Portland. Hi, Tawita. Good evening. Kasama rin natin si Ginoong Renato Reyes, ang Secretary General ng Bagong Alyansang Makabayan dito sa Pilipinas. Magandang umaga po sa inyo, sir. Also, we have Ms. Bernadette Eljorin, the National Spokesperson of Bagong Alyansang Makabayan in the US. Good evening. Kasama rin po natin sa panayam ngayon si Ms. Lisa Ito, ang Secretary General ng Concerned Artists of the Philippines. Hi, ma'am. Kumusta po kayo? And also, last but not the least, kasama rin po natin si Mr. Ramon Mapala, ang National Convener ng Malaya Movement. And he's based in New York sa USA. Good evening, sir. Magandang umaga at magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat na kasama natin ngayon. Kumusta po kayong lahat?
Okay naman.
Okay naman.
Buhay pa.
Ayos. Sir Renato, kumusta po kayo? Ano pong lagay natin ngayon dyan?
Well, nandito kami sa Quezon City ngayon. We're just two days away from the anniversary of martial law. At yung pakiramdam ng marami ngayon, at hindi maiwasan na ikumpara yung situation natin ngayon with the situation in 1972 when martial law was declared. Just look at the pandemic response of the Philippines. The entire pandemic response is militarized. It is led by generals. The restrictions on the movement of people are very harsh. There have been arrests on the basis of mere quarantine violations. People have been jailed for not wearing a face mask, for being out in the public, exercising their constitutional rights. It is also during this time that we witnessed the passage of the anti-terror law, something which has no place during a pandemic. It has no real purpose during a pandemic. We saw the shutdown of the ABS-CBN network. The last time that ABS-CBN was shut down was during the Marcos dictatorship. Yes. We have seen a rise in the number of extrajudicial killings of activists. So even during the pandemic, even during the lockdown, the state forces have not stopped harassing activists, filing trumped-up charges, and up to killing of activists. Right now, it's the 40th day since Randall Echanes was murdered in Quezon City. And the whole world is witness to how bad the human rights situation is in the Philippines right now. Even the European Union Parliament has passed a resolution calling for an investigation into the rising number of human rights violations. So clearly, the sentiment is that we are living, even if there's no declared martial law, we are living under a de facto martial law, under a virtual martial law that affects everyone. And that's the reason why on Monday, thousands will be protesting again in the streets to denounce this situation and to say never again to another fascist dictatorship.
nabanggit natin kanina na meron din tayong mga iba pang mga activities kaugnay nga nung sinabi ni Sir Nato, no? Tungkol dito sa komemorasyon ng deklarasyon ng martial law. How about those from our friends in the US? Tabitha, Bernadette, kumusta ang lagay dyan sa US ngayon?
Tabitha, you want to go first? Yeah. Medyo busy din kami dito. We're preparing for lots of actions across the country. They span different activities. So maraming online rallies, and then we also have in-person protests in front of consulates at saka sa embassy sa Washington, D.C. So since nag-hit yung COVID-19, dito sa US, we've been on lockdown too. But the actions taking to the streets in person hasn't slowed down. We've actually seen an increase in people mobilizing for the Philippines here.
I'll just add on that we're happy to share the good news that yesterday, September 17, the Philippine Human Rights Act, which is a bill that is proposing to suspend U.S. assistance and aid to the Philippines on the condition that the human rights violations stop, and that the perpetrators of the killings, of the state repression, are held accountable, was introduced into the U.S. House of Representatives. And this is really a culmination of over 2 years of our advocacy work, our mobilizing on the ground, our alliance building with many of our friends and supporters here in the U.S., including labor unions, churches, very close friends and allies in the Filipino community. And Bayan USA has been very, very proud to be working side by side with the Balaya movement, the National Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, ITERP, and many other organizations here in the US. The reality is that we will also be participating and mobilizing on September 21 across the US in front of the embassy, in front of consulates. We have been mobilizing, we haven't stopped mobilizing. And ever since the Duterte regime came into power in 2016, we have been very active in our human rights campaign. Also knowing that the Philippines is the #1 recipient of US aid, no? So we've been working very hard to ensure that that the U.S. Congress recognizes where the money is going and how it's being used. So we're very happy with this development, and it's really a result of not just of our lobbying work, but the consistent mobilizing we've been doing on the ground with many of our friends and allies here in the U.S. Yeah.
Maraming salamat doon, Bernadette, sa update. Magbibigay lang din ako ng update, no? Kahapon merong pumasok lang din na balita. September 18, ini-extend daw, meron ng nilabas na statement, no, or order na extended ang state of emergency sa Pilipinas for another year. So that's from September 13, 2020 of the current year hanggang next year 2021, dahil sabi nila kailangan daw gamitin ito para sa pandemic response dito sa Pilipinas. Anong masasabi natin doon, Ma'am Lisa?
Hello?
Yes.
Hello, Brian. Ayun, no? Yung the extension of what you call the state of calamity up to next year.
State of calamity.
Yeah. So close to September 21 and even sounding very close to Proclamation 1081. Yes. It reminds us of a lot of things, and it's like history going on loop. Kasi even if they extend the state of calamity, or their declaration of the state of calamity, it's very different from the response that we've seen so far, which is for most part military solutions or military responses instead of medical solutions to the crisis. Yung continuing neglect of the poorest sectors in Philippine society who have the least access to social services and everything that we need, no, and livelihood in order to survive the pandemic, as well as fear, pananakot, and terror against the people. So it's no assurance that extending the state of calamity through a proclamation will solve the will be the right answer to the situation that we face now. We still need mass testing. We still need aid, relief, and long-term livelihood and solutions to the crisis. And I think that's and since we're seeing history on loop, it's always important to remember that the lessons that history has taught us when dealing with authoritarian rulers. When the Concerned Artists of the Philippines was founded back in 1983, um, we were united by the idea and the vision that artists and Filipinos, we are all citizens and we should be concerned and acting upon the issues that the country faces. And if there's something that martial law has taught us, it's that we must never forget. No, totoo yun, we have a very long history of being colonized. We have a long history of yun nga, feudal rule and repression. But it's true that we also have a very long history of people's struggle, and art and culture has always been a part of that struggle and fighting back. Um, all the way from armed struggle to art in the struggle, we have this rich history of the people always responding to the harshest of and the most repressive of conditions. Kaya kanina nakakatuwa kasi the songs, the poetry that we watched and shared during the program, all of these are part of that history. Some of the poems were written by people who, during back in the 70s or in the 80s, they responded to the call to learn from the communities and to tell the stories of the people. Some of them died as martyrs, and that's why we continue to pay tribute and commemorate and remember what they did, and their sacrifice lives on in their art, which is continually being revived and tinutugtog lagi, tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung sining. And theater workers brought out their art to the streets. Ganon din sa musicians, visual artists made art not only for the galleries but also art that for the moving crowds, such as the mural that you see sa likod ko.
Right.
It was made by yung mga kasama sa Concerned Artists of the Philippines Visual Artists Pool. Hello! Ang galing-galing nyo. And we'll be bringing this mural later to the launch of the Justice for Echani's Justice for All Network, or JEJA Network, which is of course a reference to the Justice for Aquino, Justice for All, or JAJA network back in the 1980s. So there are all of these stories, some of which were captured through the program, of how artists continue to fight back with the people. And yun nga, we really have to remember, and we have to unite against what's happening now. Ayun.
Correct. Bago tayo dumako dun sa isa pa nating kasama, no, na maganda yung nabanggit ni Ma'am Lisa tungkol dun sa initiatives ng mga artist groups dito sa Pilipinas na patuloy na ikwento yung mga karanasan ng martial law, di ba? Kumusta naman dyan sa artist community natin, Ginger, sa US? And I believe Tabitha and si Ma'am Bernadette, they still want to, they have also initiatives, no, in retelling these stories para hindi siya makalimutan, kasi bahagi siya ng madilim na kasaysayan ng ating bansa. And syempre, we all know na kahit na nasa US kayo, yung mga relatives natin na matanda who were still here in the Philippines back in the 70s before going to the States, di ba? They experience those tremors. So what can you say about that? How are the artists, our friends there in the US reacting to all these? And what are the initiatives in terms of retelling the stories of the dark times during the martial law era is concerned?
Yes, yeah, Brian. So, one of the pieces, the excerpts that Circo Pintig was able to share was from our musical of our version of the Game of Trolls Revisited. And so this was actually a great production for many of the people who had been victims or who had family and friends who were victims to kind of revisit what happened. Of course, a lot of the work that we do as a community arts organization, the social justice work that we do, happens with the talkbacks that we have after performances. And this was really an opportunity to see our community members, even our leaders, our elders in the community, finally having the space to speak about what their experiences were 20, 30 years ago. And it was very powerful to have that kind of discussion with the community. And this is all educational for us too. I'm here, living most of my life in America. So I'm very kind of distant from some of these issues. But I do know that we also have some Filipino American artists here. For example, Cesar Conde, he is an artist that's doing a lot of wonderful visual artwork around Black Lives Matter. And for him, it's about equality. It's about standing up to injustice and to racism. And of course, you've heard of the stories in the news that's happening here. Again, we're here in Chicago, so everything that's been happening around the country, we are also having these kinds of struggles that we're facing. Next month is Filipino American History Month. We'll be celebrating that here in Chicago with the Filipino American National Historical Society. And the theme is the history of Filipino American activism. And so, as we are preparing for this, we are reflecting on how our, Philippine Phil-Ams here living in the States, who many family has immigrated here because of the plight of the political system that they left. So I can just say that as a martial law baby, this is, again, there's so many echoes, and the more and more we see and hear about the stories, and the more and more we see that it is continuing, and maybe even in some cases worse, as we recognize, it's really terror again. And as Lisa mentioned, we should not forget. So we're doing what we can here to build awareness among our community and to make sure that we're standing up against this injustice. So I do thank the work of everyone here for all the organizing and mobilization. And we're committed to do what we can to speak out and inform.
Okay. Speaking of those things na sinasabi ni Ginger, no, magandang ultimo dyan sa US ay nagagawa natin na paalabin pa rin yung bahagi na yan, yung kamulatan ng mga tao tungkol sa bahagi niya ng kasaysayan natin. Sir Mon, kayo po, we understand that isa po kayo, no, kabilang po kayo doon sa mga talagang nabuhay ng panahon na naganap yung martial law dito sa Pilipinas. Maari po ba kaming makarinig ng ilang mga mga accounts or kwento po sa inyo na pwede naming mapulutan talaga ng aral at para sa mga kabataan din dyan na Pilipino sa US?
Sir Mon, you're muted.
Sir Mon, nakamute po kayo.
Sir Mon, can you please unmute
Opo. Ayan, hindi natin marinig
yung
bahagi ng...
Sorry.
Ayan, sir, okay na po.
Hello.
May nag-mute sa akin, no? Anyway, magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat at salamat sa CAP at Pintig for inviting me. Yes, yung dito sa US, basically, itong mga recent decades, what we're doing was nag-imbita kami ng mga artists, no, ng mga performing artists like yung PETA noon, in-sponsor namin dito sa East Coast, Panata sa Kalayaan, and then yung Art of Resistance, sila Dolorico, sila Egay, in-exhibit namin dito. At marami pang iba, no, I didn't want to go into details, but meron din kami binuo dito actually sa Jersey, Pintig din, similar to Pintig Chicago. But I think Chicago is more on the mas malaki yung scope ng ginagawa nila, teatro. Tapos yung mga performing artists na nanggagaling nga sa Pilipinas, inaano namin, ini-introduce namin. Hindi lang yung mga progressive, kundi yung mga nationalistic na na mga folk. So, well, kasama rin ako dun sa sa grupo na nagsampa ng kaso, yung nag-initiate ng kaso sa Hawaii, yung human rights kay human rights case sa Hawaii. Yung part ako nung mga individual kasi hinati yan into 3 groups eh. So yung isa, hindi ako kasama dun sa class action. So doon kami sa individual. Kami yung nag-umpisa niyan actually. And then sumunod na lang yung class action. Yung unang kaso, Marcos was still sitting president. But that lost. So nire-appeal uli ng lawyer namin. And that one went to trial twice. We had to fly to Hawaii twice and sit down the witness chair and relate din yung kung ano nangyari sa amin and ano nangyari nung martial law. And then eventually, everybody knows that the case won. And some of the victims were remunerated. Yung nakatanggap sila ng reparations, not only from Hawaii, but yung iba nakatanggap from the government. But yun nga, nung nahuli ako sa Northern Luzon kasi, sa UP Baguio. 1972, 5 days before official declaration of martial law, pinaligiran nila yung Baguio, UP Baguio. And then, nung nakatakas ako, nakalabas ako ng campus, pero nung natuntun nila ako sa boarding house, dinala nila ako sa gubat. At doon, alam kong ito na yung katapusan. So, nagdasal ako, nagpaalam na ako, I made peace with my God, and I thought that was it. And then, nagkasa na sila ng mga baril. And then they had this radio call from the camp to go back to base. So, we went back to base, which is Camp Dangwa na ngayon. Camp Ponce dati yan eh. Then from there, we were transferred some of the political prisoners. Andun mga kasamang, hindi lahat yon mga political, mga anti-Marcos lang. So, punta kami sa Camp Aquino, Tarlac, doon mas malaki. In fact, may isang cultural group na inimbita namin na nahuli sa Northern Luzon, sa Ilocos, yung Gintong Silahis, na nagkita-kita kami dun sa Camp Aquino. Hiwalay, of course, yung detention camp ng lalaki sa mga babae. And then, I was moved to, some of us were moved to Camp Olivas. So doon na kami pinalabas. Ako, specifically kasi parang iba-ibang hindi naman niya palalabasin lahat eh. Tinitignan nila yung mga kaso tapos unti-unti pinalalabas nila. Kasi wala silang walang ebidensya ganun. So ang doon, pagdating ko dito, tinuloy namin yung laban. Nagsampa nga kami. We took the initiative. May mga kasama ako nun sa KM na sumama sa amin. So, we filed the case. But yung experience ko as a cultural worker went into productions. May mga ginawa kami mga indie films dito with Love Diaz, sila Kit Sikat, etc. etc. Clarissa Del Dos Reyes, mga magagaling na batang direktor. and Robert Reyes. So makikita niyo yung mga films, kakaiba na approach. Hindi na yung regular sampalan, sabunutan, sigawan, May mga social content na yung mga indie films na to. Kaya makikita mo yung mga iba sa kanila nananalo sa mga international film festival. Hopefully, pag na-develop itong type of social realist films na hindi masyadong OA, hopefully we can kakalat to sa mundo na talaga magagaling tayo. I mean, as artists, in real filmmaking, whether it's filmmaking or even painting, or whatever type of art.
Ayan. Doon naman sa bahagi natin dyan sa bayan, sa USA, pangkalahatan, in general, we keep on hearing stories, Bernadette, about these things na history repeating itself. Diba? What is the reaction of the Filipino, American, and our friends there in the US about these things in the Philippines? What is the general reaction of everyone?
Well, I think there are different views coming from the Filipino American community and what's happening in the Philippines. But I also think that, well, first of all, us in Bayan USA and in the Malaya movement and in the other organizations that we work with here, we don't subscribe to this viewpoint that the Duterte government always says in the news, is that Filipinos in the US are in the US and therefore shouldn't be concerned about what's happening in the Philippines. Or we left the Philippines and therefore we're Americans and we're not Filipinos. Or we shouldn't even bother to think about what's happening in the Philippines because we left. We don't have the right. We have never subscribed to that view. First of all, the people who are being killed, the people who are fighting for the poor themselves, the very reasons why they are being killed, or very reason why they are struggling, are the same reasons why Filipinos are leaving the Philippines to be able to survive the crisis of the semi-colonial, semi-feudal system. And until such time there is genuine change, this massive out-migration of Filipinos won't stop. And so many of us here in the US understand that, because that's also our experience. People like Mon, who came to the US after being persecuted in the Philippines, for his political activism. I think it's not just migrant Filipinos or Filipinos who immigrated from the Philippines who are speaking out. You have second, third generation Filipinos here in the US who don't speak Tagalog, who are embracing the cause of human rights and democracy in the Philippines because they are understanding the root causes of their family's migration. And that until such time there's systemic change in the Philippines, of which fascism is a part of, that we'll never be able to claim our homeland. So, and also at the same time, there are also Filipinos here who are very concerned that their tax dollars are being used to provide weapons and bullets, to the AFP, who are the ones perpetrating, to the death squads who are perpetrating these atrocities and these killings. So I think there are many perspectives, but I think what unifies us is that we love the Philippines. Even though we're in the US, we love the Philippines, and we are concerned about human rights and democracy, especially when so many overseas, when so many other governments around the world are condemning what's happening under the Duterte administration, including the United Nations. So in that type of climate, I think Filipinos in the US, for many years, even during the time of Marcos, have always been rising up to voice our concern about what's happening in the Philippines. Here in the US, we remit our hard-earned dollars to be able to feed our families back home, and also we help keep the Philippine economy afloat. That type of economic support from overseas Philippines to translate to political influence as well.
Yes. History, kasaysayan, matagal na panahon na. Tabitha, sa younger generation dyan sa US, what is the reaction of among your friends, among your colleagues about this? Kasi yung iba sabi nila, lalo na rito rin sa Pilipinas, so let me share something lang. Hindi naman daw kasi bahagi talaga ng kasaysayan, kwento lang daw siya ng mga pasaway ng mga mamamayan na galit sa gobyerno. Siyempre, that is absurd. No? That is an absurd statement. Kayo dyan, sa US, Tabitha?
Yeah, I think, there is definitely a resurgence of interest from the younger Filipinos and the Filipino Americans in the US about what's happening in the Philippines, but also, the history of how they came to America. There's that very popular video of martial law victims that was made a few years ago that I know, like for some of my friends around here, was one of the first times that they heard about the martial law in the Philippines and heard from the victims of martial law. And I know that for so many, that video and that cultural art piece moved a lot of people to action. And, I think a lot of people are seeing the fascism in the Philippines of the Duterte regime and are able to see that kind of happen in the US under Donald Trump. And, the lack of resources that are being put into COVID-19 response here in the US, and also the disproportionate death of Filipino healthcare workers in the US from COVID-19. There are so many things that the younger Filipino generation are seeing and are able to link, what's going on in the Philippines, what's going on here, and our move to action. And I mentioned earlier, in the past few months, since we've been on lockdown in the US, we've had 4 other chapters of the Malaya movement pop up across the country. We've had more people attend our webinars, our online rallies. And a lot of them are like Filipino Americans who have been divorced from their Filipino culture and grew up without, a Filipino community. But one of the, I suppose, positive things about having to go online is that more people are paying attention to social media. And that has certainly brought a lot more activity and action and interest in becoming an activist, becoming an organizer, and becoming a part of this growing movement against the fascism of the Duterte regime here, from the younger people especially.
Ginger, before I give you the floor again, I just would like to react to what Tabitha said. Napakaganda. It's a wonderful thing to hear something like that from one member of the younger generation. Short lang, Tabitha, why is this important to you?
Yeah, so that's a very weighty and hard question. But I think for me, I grew up in Manila. I immigrated to the US as a teenager. And so I think that this resonates for me because when I was in the Philippines, a lot of the stuff that I'm learning now was shielded, and it was sort of like revisionist history, like the horrors of the Marcos era. Those were not taught to me. And I only learned about it once I became involved in the Filipino-American organizing movement here and really learned the real history of the Philippines. One that is, has been colonized for hundreds of years, but one that also has a really strong history and, like struggle and resistance is in our blood. And I think that follows us, and that followed me here. And I think seeing the ways in which the Duterte regime has just been so relentless and relentless and violent towards the most marginalized people in the Philippines. That's really what kind of opened my eyes to the systematic and overall just corruption and violence that is built into the Philippine government. And being part of the Malaya movement, like, we stand for genuine democracy in the Philippines. And I think, you know, as a lot of people kind of start to feel hopeless, especially in a time of crisis, in a time of pandemic, in a time of like utter violence across the world, the hope for a better Philippines is something that grounds me and continues to push me forward.
Wow. Wow. Napakaganda nung sinabi ni Tabitha. Ginger, are we going to listen to some more messages from our guests from the Philippines? Yeah.
Yes. So we would just like to open up for any final comments. You know, I think, Brian, we were hoping for an 1.5-hour event. And we are now at almost 2.5. But we've had wonderful stories, and again, such wonderful guests here to share with us. So do we have any other guests that would like to add some final remarks before we sign off this evening?
Yes, Sister Renato.
Yeah, we hope folks abroad continue to monitor what is happening in the Philippines and to actively support the struggle for human rights, freedom, and democracy in the Philippines. So on Monday, we may be socially distant, but we hope you can still join us, even online, for the big protest taking place as we commemorate the 48th anniversary of the Marcos Declaration of Martial Law, and as we fight the new embodiment of Marcos, the new tyrant, lording it over in the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. So thank you very much. Shout out to all the performers and to the organizers of this event. Salamat po.
Ma'am Lisa.
Yes, we'd also like to thank everyone who was part of this event and this production, both from Sir Kapintig and from Cap and our friends who very generously sent in their performances, their works, wrote the script, made visuals, everyone who contributed to this. And I think this is also proof of how artists and cultural workers today continue to unite against fascism. In the next few days, tomorrow we'll be holding our first memory project. We call this. We'll be showing a documentary, which was on political detainees, which first was produced in 1984. That's tomorrow evening, and of course on September 21, we'll be joining the mobilization. Not just commemorating but resisting the return of tyranny, online and offline. Then in an hour, 1 hour after this, we will be also present online and offline for the launch of the JEJA event, seeking justice for Randy Etchanis and justice for all. And like in the past, whether that was during the time of direct colonial rule by Spain or the US, or during the time of neo-colonial rule under the various dictatorships and regimes that we have, artists and cultural workers have continually responded to the challenge of the times. The slogan behind me says, Artista ng Bayan, Paglingkuran ng Sambayanan. And that has been the vision and the commitment before and even up to now. So let's continue to build social solidarity amidst these very challenging times. And we will overcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Message from Bernadette. Last.
Marami pong salamat sa CAP and Sir Kapintig and lahat ng mga organizations that put an artist who put this event together. We're very inspired. Of course, we take our lead. Even though we're overseas, we take our lead from the people's struggle back home to Pilipinas, those in the front lines, those who are facing the attacks head on, and those who are fearless, those we have lost, those who are mourning, those who are moving forward despite all the hardships. So thank you. We have so much, we draw so much inspiration from the people's struggles sa Pilipinas. Maraming salamat.
Tabitha.
Yeah, maraming salamat. This was a very powerful and moving event, and one that I think we would love to mimic here in the US for sure. And good luck, Padayan, on your events on Monday, September 21st.
Siyempre, Ginger, last but not the least.
Yes, well, we will definitely want to continue these kinds of events. We want to continue to come together. And I thank you, Brian. I thank Cap. I thank again all of the artists. And of course, for our viewers, especially those who are able to make a financial support. We do have a current fundraising goal for the People Artists Fund. And again, there is a dollar for dollar match. Please visit circopintig.org so that we can support this kind of work. And we thank you for our kababayans here for joining us today, for all of the artists and organizers, and of course, our guests. We wish you all to stay safe, to stay strong, and to continue the fight.
Yes. Before that, Sermon, kayo po, huling mensahe na lang.
I'm gonna quote Attorney Neri Colmenares. Sabi niya the last time he spoke. I was actually there. I was stranded there for the past five months. So yung mga inuulat yung pangyayari sa pandemic, talagang nakita ko cognitively. Yung nakita ko talaga, naranasan ko. And it's true. Pero sabi ni Neri na we have survived Marcos, we have survived Ramos, we have survived Erap, Arroyo, Aquida, Aquinos. We will definitely survive Duterte. So, tuloy lang ang laban. Hindi dapat tayo matakot sa mga napabagsak natin yung mga presidente yun. Ito, hindi natin kaya. Ang kaibahan lang dito, siyempre, mga inchik naman yung boss chief niya. Si Marcos, mga merkado. So, tuloy pa rin. Salamat.
Maraming salamat po. Ginger, there we have 3 sets of powerful performances plus, wow, very inspiring stories and discussions of issues at the talkback from all our guests. We would like to thank our artists, our performers, and of course, our guests for their messages and everyone involved in this production. On September 21, we honor the martyrs of martial law, those who died and those who disappeared. Definitely, there is no greater honor for them than a bigger and consolidated fight against the present tyrant in Malacanang. Let me just say this one more time. Tuloy lang po ang laban, artista ng bayan, paglingkuran natin ng sambayanan.